Okay, this will be an overview of natural and man-made hazards. My name's Rob Snow. I'm the Emergency Preparedness Specialist for the 8th Ward in the Traverse Mountain Stake. So we'll just go through these one at a time here. This is an outline of the course, not of the course of the presentation. We'll be covering, just talking a little bit about why it's important to prepare, and then we'll cover each of these 4 hazards: earthquakes, wildfire, hazardous facilities, and transportation. And then at the end, we'll wrap it up with a little bit of a discussion on what we should do next and what the path forward is. Okay, why prepare? Here I'll cut away from this video and put in a little video presentation from FEMA. So we'll cut away now.
All right, I know this isn't any fun to talk about, but we should. Okay, so who's gonna do what?
I'll pack the dead batteries.
Great.
I'll only put what I don't need into a duffel bag.
Perfect. That's totally unhelpful.
No problem.
Meanwhile, I will try to comfort everyone by speaking in a calm voice.
And I'll try to get the generator going without any gas.
Oh, let's not forget the cell phones, which probably won't work.
Right.
And who is going to handle supplies?
I can forget to do a list for us.
Thanks, pal.
Well, I think we couldn't be any less prepared. I'm proud of you guys.
Talk to your kids about who to call, where to meet, what to pack. Visit ready.gov/kids for tips and information.
Okay, now we're back. First, we'll be talking about earthquakes. Up on top here, a very common thing that occurs in earthquakes is conflagrations, which are large fires involving multiple structures that kind of rapidly get out of control. That can happen after earthquakes as gas lines rupture, etc. This photo here on the right indicates occurred as an effect of liquefaction. As the liquefaction occurs when the ground loses strength entirely. And at that point, these buildings were on liquefiable layers and they just started to tilt. The thing is that after the earthquake, after the shaking stops, that ground gradually gains its strength back. So once these buildings had tilted a little bit, the earthquake stopped and they froze in place. So, they didn't really have a lot of other damage other than the utilities broken and everything being tipped over. So, and here on the bottom, this is a very common thing with masonry structures, is just a collapse of, in this case, the structural elements as well. So, move on here. Okay, so brief overview of some brief tectonics. We're on the North American plate. Utah is approximately where that blue oval is. So the Juan de Fuca plate and the Cocos plates are pushing into the continent while the Pacific plate is moving upwards, towards Alaska. So most of our earthquakes happen along those plate boundaries. However, in the case of Utah, most of our earthquakes are produced by a different mechanism on the interior of the plate. The next slide will kind of show us how that works. So in between the Sierra Nevadas in California and the Wasatch Range in Utah, so this includes a little bit of California, all of Nevada, and a lot of Utah as well. But we have what we call the Basin and Range Province, and in that area, it's the crust is really extending. So inside the plate, we've got this extension going on, and that creates a series of normal faults along this area. So the little blue square on the right on the Wasatch Range blows up, and then I move that down to the bottom so we could see it here a little better. But so the mountainside moves up, and the valleys move down relative to each other. And that's called a normal fault during earthquake, and that's what we have to deal with here in our area. So a couple of months ago, we had a small earthquake that occurred in the Tooele area. So the shading on this map, this is called the shake map. It's produced by the University of Utah seismograph stations. And so the light blue to blue, as you can see on the scale down at the bottom, corresponds to pretty light. It's level 1 or 2 ground shaking. And so it's weak and just barely felt. It's not very strong. So I was really disappointed because this very same day I was driving back from West Jordan when the earthquake occurred, and if I hadn't been driving, I think I would have had a good chance of feeling it. So by the time I got home and Twitter blew up about the earthquake, I was pretty disappointed. Anyway, you can see none of us really out here felt it in Lehi. As you can see, by the time we get over to Lehi, there's it's the figure's gone back to white, and it wasn't felt. So I wanted to show you this one to contrast, to show a contrast with the one I'm going to show you next, which is a scenario shake map. So that was developed by the seismograph stations as well to kind of just give us an idea about what we're going to be up against in a large 7.0 magnitude earthquake on the Wasatch Front. So let me switch to that one. Okay, so here's the new shake map for the scenario event. So this is a hypothetical scenario just to give us an idea of what the shaking might be like. So there's a lot more red, a lot more orange. Most of the valley is in this orange to red zone. You see here in Lehi, we've got some red as well. So that corresponds to severe to extreme shaking. That's how it would feel to us, as well as moderate to heavy damage. So this graphic, I think, is good to kind of give us an idea about when an earthquake might occur. So it's important for us to think in geologic terms as we look at this. So on the right side here, moving from top to bottom, we have the different segments of the Wasatch Fault. So the most important to us are the Salt Lake City and Provo segments, as we're kind of straddled right in between the two. And each one of these, so if you look down at the bottom of the figure, 0 for how many years ago, essentially you can consider that now. And then moving to the left is back in time. So each one of these dots represents a different major earthquake on each of these segments. So for the Salt Lake City segment, you can, just by looking at the spacing between the dots, you can kind of get a feel for how frequently we have major earthquakes on this segment of the fault. So just kind of looking at that, you can see that it's been quite a while. It's been about 1,500 years since we've had an earthquake here, and it's about getting to that right time for us to have another earthquake. However, on the adjacent Provo segment, excuse me, we had one about 500 years ago, so 500, 600 years ago. So we're in pretty good shape on that one. It's probably not very likely that we'd have an earthquake on that segment in the near future. Just in contrast, you look up at the Brigham City segment, and it's been over 2,000 years since their last earthquake. And that is, in fact, the largest gap on the map for that segment. So something to think about. Okay, next. This map will give us all an idea and an understanding of how far away we are from the fault. So we're here in this red circle. That's approximately our location in the Traverse Mountain development area. So as we travel northeast to the orange line on the map, that is the Wasatch Fault. So that's approximately 5.5 miles away from us. A pretty good distance, and certainly it's better than being right on top of the fault. So the next map, actually, it's an aerial photography that I'm going to show you, is the same area, but we're essentially looking down and to the east. So the Traverse Mountain development is down at the bottom right corner of the screen, and Draper, you can see the icon showing Draper City Park. So that's the Draper area, and you can actually see the fault. If you remember in that last figure, it was kind of curving around the back end of Draper, and it's doing that here. If you just look right where the valley meets the mountain, you can see that arcs around, and then by the time it gets to the end of Draper, it just starts heading due east back into Alpine. You can see kind of the boundary between the valleys and the mountains where it gets steeper suddenly. So it goes all the way to the back of Alpine and then kind of heads due south through Alpine, through the very edge of Alpine and into the Cedar Hills area. So even from this aerial photography, you can get a pretty good idea about where the fault is just by looking at the aerial. I thought this would be fun to include. This is just a little picture of aerial picture of the fault in the Highland area. It's kind of interesting, but the people who laid out Highland Drive essentially put it right along the trace of the Wasatch Fault in that area. in this area in downtown Salt Lake City and Highland, the fault has primarily come away from the mountain, and it's going right through the valley. It's kind of interesting. Okay, next this photograph shows the fault scarp near the mouth of Little Cottonwood Canyon and Wasatch Drive. This fault scarp is about 130 feet tall and represents multiple faulting events. Each rupture, can displace that fault somewhere between 10 and 15 feet. So that represents multiple events. Okay, so here's a map of peak horizontal ground acceleration. And I'm hoping this will give us a little bit of a few warm fuzzies to think about. Just understanding that it could be worse, obviously. So let's think about this for a few seconds. So the scale down on the right side of the screen shows the colorations going from 0.1 to about 1 G. Now in this case, G refers to acceleration, and 1 G is equal to the amount of acceleration due to gravity. So you think about the downward acceleration on all of us and everything in our world applied laterally or to the side. So we get this horizontal force of up to 1 G moving us from side to side, and that polarity is constantly switching during the earthquake. So if you look into Draper, there's lots of yellows and some oranges, and going further north into Sandy, there's more orange. So those areas will see a very high level of ground shaking. Now, as we move down the Traverse Mountain Range to come over to where I-15 crosses the Salt Lake County line into Utah County, you just think about where our neighborhood is as we cross that boundary. We're just a little bit off this map. But if you look at that light blue to dark blue band, and that extends into our neighborhood. And so we're going to deal with a level of ground shaking that's closer to 0.3 to 0.6 Gs. So it's still a lot of ground shaking, but it's certainly not as high as it could be. Now a little bit of discussion on some benefits and typical damage that we see in wood-framed homes. So there's a lot of benefits. We've got a lot of things good going for us when we live in these types of homes. So wood has great ductility and flexibility. So it can really kind of move and flex with that earthquake motion as it rolls through our structure. And due to the kind of lower level of shaking that we'll see here and the good performance of wood-framed homes, we should have pretty relatively minor structural damage to our homes. Also, our homes should have foundation straps or bolts to keep them on the foundation. That should have been part of the code when our homes were built. However, if your basements are unfinished, it's not a bad idea to just go down and lift up some of that insulation and kind of have a look and make sure that there are foundation bolts or straps in place, because that will keep our homes, keep the wooden part of the home on the foundation. And also, all of our water heaters should be secured, but it's a good idea to just take a look and make sure that they in fact are. So if you have any questions, you can give me a call about securing a water heater. I'd be happy to help. So typical types of damage we'll probably see is a lot of cracking of the exterior stucco. Again, that's non-structural, though. It can just be repaired pretty easily. Inside the home, we'll see a lot of cracking. So corners of doors, corners of the homes, we could see a fair amount of cracking in our sheetrock. And then as well as on the outside, a lot of us have stonework or brickwork that's been done. And that's just facade. There's no structural component to that. So, those will just fall off during an earthquake. So it's a good idea to not run outside during an earthquake, just past the facade where some of these pieces of rock or brick could be falling. But once the earthquake's done, it's not a big amount of work to just adhere those back on. Some of the things we'll really have to worry about, though, in our homes, I think we've got a lot of heavy furniture, frames on the walls. All of those things are quite a bit of higher concern in my mind. So Julie's been bothering me about encouraging me to get a large hutch that we have in our living room secured to the wall, and I still haven't done it. So everybody's got room for improvement, including me. So just a good thing to keep in mind. If you have any heavy frames or art above beds or above couches where people are sitting, all of those things are a really good idea to secure to the wall. So, and we've got a lot of art and going up our stairs, and that could benefit from a little better securing, so that we don't have all those come off the wall and create a sea of glass for us to navigate. So some things to think about. So now we're going to cut away to watch a short clip of the video that was prepared by Be Ready Utah, to just kind of give us an idea of what we're up against during an earthquake here on the Wasatch Front. So we'll cut away for that now.
It's a cold winter day in Utah. Along the Wasatch Front, hundreds of thousands of people are busy at work. Many of them are commuting to jobs in different counties, far from where they live. 80% of the state's 2.7 million people live and work in the region. Today, these families and many others across the region will be separated. The largest earthquake to hit Utah in modern times has just begun. The rupture travels approximately 25 miles north along the Wasatch Fault. Some react appropriately, others don't. Over 10,000 buildings collapse. The shaking lasts for nearly a minute in some areas, damaging 285,000 buildings. Even in buildings that are not damaged, possessions fall down or are thrown across rooms. Infrastructure is destroyed. Utilities throughout Utah are disrupted. 2,300 people will die. 30,000 people will be injured. And $35 billion in building damages will occur. Finally, the shaking is over. A large number of people are trapped in collapsed buildings. Over 160 fires start, some turning into conflagrations. Hundreds of thousands of people are trying to use their phones, causing the system to become overloaded. In the months ahead, there will be tens of thousands of aftershocks. Residents will struggle to recover from the earthquake. There will be no water for weeks or months and no electricity. Traveling around town will be more difficult and time-consuming, and 350,000 people will be displaced from their homes. We are all in this together. We will all suffer the earthquake's consequences if most of us do nothing now. How quickly you will recover from this disaster is up to you and those around you. Your level of personal preparedness will determine your quality of life after the quake. Here are a few things you can do to prepare. It's a good idea to have a fire extinguisher, a first aid kit, and at least a 3-day supply of water for each person in your household. Have an emergency plan and decide where you will meet up with your family after an earthquake. Make sure there is a person out of town you can contact to let your loved ones know that you're okay. When remodeling your older brick home, consult a professional engineer or the Utah Guide for the Seismic Improvement of Unreinforced Masonry Dwellings. Consider whether earthquake insurance makes sense for you as part of your financial plan. You should also secure furniture, your hot water heater, and heavy or valuable items so they won't fall. Preparedness is not only for the home, but also for business. Be sure that your company has emergency plans for a major earthquake. Empower yourself and your family. Be prepared. For more information, visit www.bereadyutah.gov.
Okay, now we're back. And we'll continue on to the next part of the presentation, which covers wildfires. This is something that's been weighing pretty heavily on my mind. You know, a couple of years ago, we had three different wildfires right around us. Two of those, one of those was in Harriman, one was in Alpine. These two photographs, in fact, are taken from that Alpine fire, and then one in Saratoga Springs. So these two photos I thought are really interesting to look at, because you can kind of look at these trees here. These trees have got to be 20, 30, 40 feet tall, and those flames are 3 times as high as the trees. So that's an incredible amount of heat and force coming off of that fire. So some statistics here. I've got a few recent fires in our area, and just to give some context as well, one in Colorado. So the 2010 Harriman fire was started by firearms that were, triggered on the Camp Williams facility. That fire moved over the mountain and down into Harriman. So 4 homes were lost during that fire. 5,000 people were evacuated from their homes at a moment's notice. In 2012, there was another fire in Harriman where 1,600 people were evacuated from their homes, and 5 homes were lost. I was reading an article that quoted the fire chief as saying that he really, seeing where that fire was going, he was expecting upwards of 100 homes to be lost, and they felt really fortunate that the winds ended up being more favorable and moving those flames away from the majority of the homes. That fire was started simply by a car idling near some tall grass on the side of the road. So that's a big concern. In Alpine, that fire in 2012 was also triggered by a track hoe that was working around some brush. So 500 homes were evacuated, and 2 homes were in fact lost in that earthquake. So in Saratoga, during that same year, 9,200 people were evacuated from their homes, and luckily no homes were lost. That fire was started by firearms. In 2012 also, it was a really bad year for fires. You probably remember how dry it was, but there were a lot of fires in Colorado. One of those caused the evacuation of 32,000 homes, and 350 of those were lost. That fire was also attributed to human cause. They weren't sure if it was in fact arson or accidental, but in either case, it was catastrophic. So this photo I thought was interesting to include. It's the home of a coworker of mine. And this was taken in 2012 at the fire in Harriman. And one of the interesting things about this was that his home wasn't really up on the upward part of the neighborhood that's right up against the urban wildlife interface. It was down in the neighborhood a few hundred feet, and the fire, for whatever reason, just kind of dove down into the neighborhood in this area and took out a couple of extra homes. Unfortunately, his was one of those. So pretty sad, but that's what happens in these horrible wildfires. So moving forward, we're going to talk a little bit about our neighborhood now, since that's what we're here to really think about and worry about. So here I just kind of got sketched on this map in red the places where we really are prone to some wildfire. There's brush below all of these slopes that would burn readily in our dry climate throughout the summer. So up from the bottom of the neighborhood, moving up the hill to the east, and as well as from the top of the neighborhood moving down. We're susceptible to this in all those areas. Now, in addition to that, we have a few areas where the landscape is, this natural landscape and vegetation moves down into the neighborhood in a couple of natural valleys. One at the top of the neighborhood, moving from east to west down towards the school. That one even has some trees in it that could burn pretty easily. And then another couple of them from the bottom, two in the country run area, and one right next to several homes of people in our neighborhood. So we'll talk about some things that we can do to protect our homes and help the firefighters have an easier job at protecting them. We'll talk about those in a minute. So another area is this newer development up at the top of the neighborhood above the Stake Center is actually pretty susceptible to wildfire. As you can see, there's brush on either side of the ravine. the small canyon, and there's several trees in there as well. Those are probably scrub oak, which during the summer months burn pretty quickly. So those people up there will need to pay attention to those defensible perimeter types of ideas and implement those to protect their homes. Two other things that I wanted to share with you. I was talking to a Lehi fireman a couple of months ago, and he informed me that until we build that new fire station up here that's inside the neighborhood, what we're looking at right now, to those upper areas of the neighborhood, up above Eagle Summit Park, and perhaps in the new development that we were talking about earlier, that the response time for those areas is around 6 to 7 minutes. Now, when we're dealing with wildfires here, where we have to think about how long it takes for the fire to start and for someone to notice that a fire has started, and then actually make that call. Once that call's made, it's still going to take 6 or 7 minutes before anybody gets up here on the scene. And then they have to assess the situation and figure out how to act. So things can get a little bit out of hand in that amount of time. We need to be prepared for that. And once we get that fire station up in the neighborhood, I think we'll be a lot better off. But for now, this is what we're dealing with. So how do we protect our homes? So a few of the things we've got going for us is that these are more modern homes and a little less rural as well. So nobody has wood sheathing or wood tiles up on the tops of their houses, which would burn readily. We've mostly got asphalt shingles or these composite tiles that are much less flammable. So for the most part, they won't ignite in a fire when they're dealing with just embers and ashes coming off the flame. So that's really what we're dealing with. So we got to think about all that heat and all that ash and on all those embers coming off the fire. And if they find anything that will ignite readily, then they'll burn. And that's the hazard. These composite tiles and asphalt shingles can handle an ember or some ash. But if we've got a pile of leaves up in a corner of the roof somewhere, and one of those ashes ignites those leaves, then that's a big enough fire to actually catch the structure itself on fire. So those are the types of things that we need to remove from corners of the roof, from corners of the house, of any of our houses if we've got just a lot of dry material sitting there, or other types of dry sources of fuel. So we'll just remove those away from the structure and get them, a lot of that's some maintenance, keep those cleaned up. Next, we need to start thinking about defensible space. So the first thing is in Zone 1, you want to have, there are several restrictions on what types of materials you want to plant there. You don't want any trees that will burn readily, where the flames could climb up the trunk of those trees and then extend on the branches to be over the structure. You don't want any of that. You want to remove any combustible materials from that zone. So wood piles, things like that, you don't want those sitting up against the house in Zone 1. And Zone 2 has other restrictions. We don't need to talk about each of those in detail, but if we've got some of these homes that are up against the urban wildlife interface, we definitely want to start thinking about this defensible space. And I can point you towards some resources, or you can contact some other qualified people to recommend, to enlighten you on the subjects. But I think these photographs here are pretty interesting to look at. The bottom one, you can see they've got some green trees, well-watered trees immediately around the house. But then next to those, there's a large area that's consists essentially of short watered grass that won't readily burn. So you can see the fire just went completely around the home in this case, and the home was saved. And looking at the photo above, they've got the same thing going here. They've got this larger defensible space. They were even able to save their little, it looks like they've got a little orchard there on the one side of the photo. So, but just creating that space really provides the maximum amount of protection that you can get from your home and gives the firefighters a good chance to be able to defend it for you. So how does a wildfire start? Well, really a very small portion of these fires is kicked off by natural means, and probably the biggest one of those is lightning. Also lava. Obviously that's a huge concern here for us, so watch out. Anyway, the rest of the 90% of reasons why they start are essentially man-made or human caused. So, burning debris in the yard, vehicles sparking, we've certainly had some experience with that here in the southern part of the Salt Lake Valley and northern Utah Valley. Cigarettes obviously are a problem, but fireworks are of concern to me, especially as we move into the 4th of July weekend here in 2014. Without fail, I see numerous aerial fireworks going off every year up here in the neighborhood, despite this being an area that's prohibited from use and firing off all types of fireworks, especially aerial fireworks. Thinking about those areas of the neighborhood that I just indicated to everybody, where there are large bushes and large brush they're really right up against our homes and fences, and it would be very easy for one of those fireworks to start some fires in those areas. So I really hope that we hold back from using those types of fireworks here in the neighborhood. We can go to other people's homes or other areas to shoot those fireworks off, and we'd be in a lot better shape here and reduce our hazard quite a bit. Campfires, arson, and unfortunately even our kids sometimes can be a cause of these wildfires. They kind of know it's wrong, so they go to places where they think no one will catch them. And unfortunately, those are usually dry fields away from everybody or in thick brush. So, and that's probably the worst place they could do it. So, and you never know who could end up causing a fire. So it's worth having a talk with your kids just to explore the dangers of starting wildfires and fires in the home as well, for that matter. So. It's a good thing to remember that typically the way this works is that we, as parents, or the responsible parties, are on the hook for any damages that would occur, and also the cost to fight the fire. That's just another reason to avoid that. So shifting focus here a little bit, we'll talk about potential hazardous locations around us that need to be addressed as a ward and as a stake. We've got a couple of water treatment plants to the north of us. One just around the side of the point of the mountain, and then the other on the west side of I-15, the Jordan Valley plant. That's part of the Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District. As far as manufacturing goes, we've got IM Flash up the road to the east. It's quite a ways away, but that's a company that I'm going to reach out to over the next month or two and explore a little bit about what kind of processes and chemicals they've got going on there, and what hazards might be there. I'm not aware of any right now, but it's just something we need to look into. Same story goes for the hot mix asphalt. They've got their own mix of safety hazards on those types of sites, but I don't think they have a lot of brush, and I'm not sure they have much else on hand other than some diesel and some of the raw materials for the hot mix asphalt. So I'm going to reach out to some of those companies and just find out a little more about what we have to worry about. So we also have the prison for the time being, Camp Williams, and the NSA facility right across the ravine from us. Certainly those are potentially hazardous locations. Lastly, we live along a major highway. You think about all the types of materials and goods that move up and down I-15. There's not a lot of other ways to get from the top half of the country down into Southern California other than I-15. So we're moving all kinds of things up and down that road, including gasoline, chlorine, explosives, ammonia, a variety of solvents, and who knows what else, really. The upper photograph here was taken of a propane fire. So this propane tanker exploded and ignited the forest on either side of the road, and we've got a lot of grass on either side of the road where that could certainly happen. The bottom one was some of those compressed gas containers that are more prevalently used in the construction industry. So you find guys just throwing those in the back of the truck, and usually they're secured well, but every once in a while something happens. In this case, a few of those containers fell off the truck after a fender bender and caused a large flame. This is an interesting case. In this case, in this photograph, there's a photo of a truck here, and the only thing that these guys did wrong is they used the wrong tanker for this type of solvent that was in this truck, and it immediately started to corrode this aluminum tanker. And this poor truck driver didn't really notice anything was wrong. He was moving down the road and finally stopped to get some food, and noticed that his tanker was in fact leaking, and a short time later that led to an explosion. Now this isn't a flame or a flammable type of chemical. It's a chemical explosion, essentially a dry explosion, but there are certainly a lot of fumes and potentially toxic chemicals that could harm nearby people. I guess this is the last thing I really wanted to talk about. Julie sent me this graphic, and I've been really concerned about it ever since I've seen it. We've got 3 monsters here indicated near or inside the state. I think the one up at the top of the state is probably the Bear Lake monster, and that maybe the one on the bottom could be hiding in Lake Powell. But I'm not sure where this alligator/horse monster is. That could be in the Great Salt Lake or in Utah Lake. I'm just not sure. We'll need to look into that more and get that implemented into the ward and stake plans. Oh, so lastly, let's just talk about what do we do next, okay? So let's just all remember that we don't need to panic, okay? We live in a relatively safe location, and all of the communities across the United States and across the world have their own unique set of hazards that they have to deal with. And for the most part, we just ignore these. But in our case, we're gonna explore those, and we're gonna put a plan in place for them. So over the next couple of months, I'm gonna try and interview some of these companies, the water districts with those water treatment plants, Ion Flash, maybe talk to some of these hot mix asphalt places, and just kind of find out what kind of problems they could have. These companies should all have emergency plans and know what hazards and risks they're dealing with. So I can talk to them and get some of that information, and then we can form some plans around those things accordingly. Another important aspect, I think, is to reach out to the schools and document some of their emergency procedures in our plans so that we know what happens if there's an emergency or some other kind of situation up at the school. I just think about all these panicking parents if something does happen at the school, just rushing up to the school and essentially just overwhelming the place. So we'll all feel a lot better, and we'll be a lot less panicked if we know what the school's planning to do with the kids. If they've got a plan to move them off site for some reason, or if there's just an area of the school that we need to be at to meet them, we'll know that, and that'll help us reduce some panic in that type of a situation. Next, we need to take small steps of action. So already in the ward, we had a primer go around about water storage and emergency communication as well. So I'm gonna make sure that those handouts are emailed around to everybody. And if you have any questions, go ahead and give me a call or send me a text or something about that, and I can help. Be happy to help in any way if you just need the hand getting started, or a push in the right direction, or just some help filling up your water containers, whatever. Next, the stake emergency plan needs a little bit of work, and I think we could include some of these hazards and an appropriate response to those hazards in the stake emergency plan, and get that, get the ward plans coordinated with the stake plan, so that we're all working together. We all want to work together so we can share the burden and share our resources as well. Lastly, I think it's really important that we find and train additional CERT volunteers. These are the people, we've got 5 in the ward right now, so I think that's a good start. We need to get several more. I'd like to see this number triple or quadruple in the next couple of years, so that we've got 15, 20 people that are trained. So if we have an emergency any time of day, we'll be likely to have 5 to 7, maybe even 10 people on hand, that once our families are safe, we can respond and just kind of move through the ward and neighborhood and make sure everybody's okay. So that's an important part of the plan, and I'll be encouraging people to get that training in the future. So we can't really take any questions on a screencast, but I hope that was informative. And if you have any questions, go ahead and shoot me an email. You can reach me at my email address, which is robert.w.snow@gmail.com, or hit me out in the neighborhood, or any other way you want to. So thanks for your time, and hope this was informative.